So that's about Boris Johnson, who had left the United Nations General Assembly in New York after that Supreme Court ruling. Now, that decision paved the way for MPs to return to the House of Commons and resume their duties. Now, over in the United States, Johnson's ally Donald Trump facing an impeachment inquiry by the Democrats, as we heard. To give us some perspective on these two leaders and what the possible future holds for them and the problems they face, I'm joined by international relations expert at Wits University, Professor John Stremlau. Professor, good evening.
Good evening.
And thanks for your time. So who do we begin with? Should we start with Boris Johnson? Let's start with him and see what's going on there. I mean, how do you see this playing out for him? Is he looking at the shortest prime ministership ever?
Well, he could be. It is a reminder in both cases of the United States and Britain that even the oldest democracies are not totally secure from demagoguery and populism and situations which are very precarious for their democracies. And Boris Johnson flew back from the United Nations last night and is in London now to a raucous parliament. You wonder what the Queen thinks, because he did advise her to go ahead and approve the suspension, which is now deemed unlawful. And so he is facing a situation where he can go to elections if he can persuade the parliament, but Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party seems to say, no, let's just focus on the fact that we're not going to have a hard Brexit on the 31st of October.
So do you think he might sort of look for a fall guy? Because, I mean, lying or misleading the Queen or lying to the Queen, I'm sure there's a big penalty to pay for that. But, you know, could he say, well, you know, this other guy advised me, there's somebody else, and I worked on that advice and find his way out of this?
He does have his Rasputin, but I don't think that's probably going to wash with anyone, because Boris Johnson is Boris Johnson. And he, like Trump, is very egocentric, very much prone to the grand gesture, and he really wanted to push through, he thought, his own vision, whatever that is, because he's never articulated a plan. Now, the October 17th, 18th meeting of the European Council will be the moment where I suspect that the British will accept an extension until the end of the year, and then we'll have to have elections sometime, I guess. But what that will bring, no one knows.
Yeah, I mean, it just leaves Brexit in a bigger mess, doesn't it?
Well, it leaves it in suspension, and my guess is that a hard Brexit's just not in the cards. You know, one stick, the Scots and the Irish are really vulnerable, but will probably go with the South, so eventually. Anyway, it's very hard to predict and as difficult as the U.S.
What would be the right thing for Boris Johnson to do? Not that he'll do the right thing.
What would it be? It's like saying, what's the right thing for Donald Trump to do? I can't put myself in his shoes. It's too difficult. These are leaders not like any I'm accustomed to seeing in responsible states.
And very much alike as well, aren't they?
I'm afraid they have personality choices.
And they do, which is why they're allies. Okay, well, let's talk about that Donald Trump, and let's talk about, you know, what this is all about. You know, we're hearing that what he did constitutes a betrayal of the country. Explain for those who don't understand about that phone call between him and the Ukraine leader, and what part of that might constitute a betrayal.
Well, the first thing is that we've only seen the summary of 5 pages of that call, and it does suggest that he was once again lying when he said he would be a fool to talk about such issues over a line that intelligence people were listening to. Well, some whistleblower felt he was violating the national security of the United States by trying to enlist the support of a foreign government, in this case Ukraine, and using the withholding of $400 million worth of military assistance, which they need and which the Congress wanted Trump to convey to them, approve, in order to get dirt on Joe Biden, which no one knows for sure whether what went on with the son, who was just on the board of an energy company, that was a Ukrainian company, but you know, this, like the Clinton emails, becomes a matter of suspicion. What I think South Africans need to understand is that there will be talk that will sound like a trial, but the impeachment process, which was set up in 1789, is very vague, and so the House of Representatives will likely will likely indict, that is, impeach, but the Senate is still controlled by the Republicans. And the real big uncertainty, when the truth comes out about what the nature of this violation of national security may or may not amount to, is whether the Republicans will finally decide they have to throw in the towel on Donald Trump and support it. But meanwhile, there's a 2020 election looming, and my guess is that the Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, if he has his druthers, will at least postpone a decision if he doesn't have the full votes. If he has the full votes, then they will vote not to convict. But there's only been 2 instances in the history of the United States where impeachment has gone to trial.
Okay, so he can be impeached but not removed.
No, he cannot be. He can only be removed by 2/3 vote of the Senate, which is still controlled by the Republicans. In the case of Andrew Johnson in 1868, they narrowly voted against impeachment. In the case of Bill Clinton in 1998, for a really lying about his relationship with this intern, they defeated it soundly, and so Clinton went on and filled out his term and left as a popular president.
Well, I just want to read here from that document, and he's talking to the Ukraine leader there, President Zelensky, and saying here, you know, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution. A lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. It sounds like he's asking it. I mean, that doesn't leave any doubt, does it?
Well, it doesn't. And he was pressured into releasing this, which is still only a summary of the talk. It's not verbatim. They don't.
There's a lot of that struck out there.
Keep those. But nevertheless, it does conflict with what he'd said publicly beforehand. And then in that note, as you say, there are these notes of this conversation. There is the impression of, not explicitly a quid pro quo, but don't forget, within a few days of this July 25th call, he froze the military assistance. You know, Zelensky's no fool. He knows the game. Mm-hmm. And so he's saying, yes, sir, we'll talk to my people, we'll talk to your people. He's trying to be accommodating because the Ukrainians are very vulnerable. The irony of all this is that he uses the Russians, the archenemy of Ukraine, to help influence the 2016 election, and now he turns around and shamelessly asks help on this Biden thing from the Ukrainians.
So no lessons learned there whatsoever for Donald Trump.
Well, the lessons are that no democracy is ever secure and you've got to fight for it, and we hope that there'll be a renewal in 2020.
And Prof, very quickly for us, to round it up, I mean, two major powers, the leaders of two major powers, this is what they're facing. What does this do to the rest of the world?
I think Cyril Ramaphosa is right to focus on South Africa's domestic problems right now, gender-based violence and violence against foreigners and the economic problems. Hope to be advocating multilateralism when you have a multilateralist in the White House, as you had with Barack Obama. And that's November 2020, if not removing Trump before then. But that's an American domestic internal affair. And in the case of Britain, it's going to take a while to sort out. But I really think for South Africa's standpoint, to get America back on the road to recovery, democratic recovery, like we're trying to do here, would be the right thing to do. But Donald Trump is a disaster.
It's a disaster, to say the least. Thanks very much. International relations expert from Wits University, Professor John Stremlau.